I'm Chris. I'm a baker. I'm a person. Nice to meet you. I'm here today to teach you a little bit about sourdough. I've been baking professionally for about a year now, and as of last week, I just got it right, or the rightest I've ever gotten. So I'm hoping to be able to teach you guys a little something about making sourdough, since we all have a lot of time on our hands thanks to quarantine. Yay! So yeah, you're gonna need a lot of stuff, and by a lot of stuff I mean not a lot of stuff, because sourdough is just 4 ingredients: flour, water, salt, and yeast. Yeast living in the form of a starter. So essentially, to get this all going, what you're gonna need is a scale. I work entirely in grams. A big bowl, because you're not going to want to have this stuff flying everywhere. It can get kind of messy if your bowl is too small. I don't recommend it. You're also going to need that starter that I was talking about, a lame, which is essentially just a razor blade on a stick. But you can also use a sharp knife. You can use a razor blade without a stick. You can use a pair of scissors. It's going to be fine. I use a laser beam to keep track of all my temperatures. Also need a bowl scraper, or you can use a spatula, whatever. You're also gonna need a cooling rack. We also are gonna need a hot cast iron. This one's at 500 degrees. If you don't have a cast iron Dutch oven, you can use a normal Dutch oven with a lid, or you can use a pizza stone or a baking stone, and then a metal bowl. Okay, so starter. Essentially, it is a yeast colony and a symbiotic bacteria colony that you're keeping alive with flour and water. Delicious. These little yeasties and bacteria are going to be creating things like carbon dioxide, ethanol, and lactic and acetic acids. Those acids will create that creamy and acidic flavor that sourdough is known for, and the carbon dioxide and the ethanol are going to give your bread the rise that it needs to grow. You're going to want to obtain or have some starter. You're going to want to feed it the night before. To feed a starter for the quantity of bread that I'm going to make, I do 6 grams of starter, 60 grams of water, and 60 grams of flour. That's about it. You mix it all up, make sure the dries are all hydrated and everything's kind of homogeneous. You're gonna put a lid on it, but you can also crack that lid just a little bit to give it some airflow, and then you're gonna leave it overnight for 12 to 16 hours. And then in the morning when you wake up, you're gonna take your starter, you're gonna look at it, she'll be nice and bubbly and pretty, and you're gonna do a float test. And a float test is essentially you have a little bit of starter, you take it and you put it into a small body of water in a bowl or a cup or whatever, and you see if it floats. And if it floats, then that indicates to you that the yeast is doing well enough to create gas, and that gas enables your starter to float because it's trapped in the gluten strands. It's all pretty wild, but essentially you're just testing to make sure your yeast is alive. I'm gonna do 100 grams of starter into my bowl. Alright, 100 grams, and then you're going to add the water. So whenever you're mixing doughs or anything of that nature, you're going to want to have your liquids in the bowl first. And this is going to help you fully hydrate your dries, like your flour and whatnot. That way it doesn't stick to the sides. You just have like an overall better mixing process. So dough ideally ferments between the temperatures of 75 and 78 degrees, referred to as the desired dough temperature. So to ensure that your dough ferments at this temperature, you're going to alter the temp of your water. So multiply 75 by 4. You need the temperature of your starter, your flour, the temperature of the room, as well as the friction factor. And the friction factor is the degrees of temperature that you contribute to the dough in the mixing method. So since we're mixing by hand, the friction factor is going to be between 0 and 4 degrees. I'm going to go with 2 degrees because it's right in the middle. And then you're going to take that original number that you multiplied. So 75 times 4 is 300. You're going to subtract the temperature of the starter. This is 68 degrees. The temperature of the room, 71 degrees. And then the temperature of the flour, which, this is Daniel Dough Maker. The temperature of the flour, which is also 71 degrees. So by that math, 300 minus 68 minus 70 minus 70 is 92 degrees. Then we're going to subtract the friction factor, which we have declared 2 degrees minus 2. We need 90-degree water to make sure that our dough exists at the temperature of 75 degrees. To ensure that your dough stays at that 75-degree temperature that we worked so hard to create, you're going to want to leave your dough in a spot that is a similar temperature between 74 and 76 degrees. Alright, so off camera I got my 90-degree water and I have it here. So you have your 100 grams of starter. You're going to add 350 grams of water to this. You're going to mix up the starter and the water, and this is going to help you evenly distribute those little yeasties throughout your dough. I have a nice little homogeneous mix. You're going to add 400 grams of flour. This is actually bread flour you're going to be adding because bread flour has the percentage of gluten that you need. So you're also going to add to that 100 grams of whole wheat flour just to give it a little extra flavor. If you don't have a whole grain flour to add to this, you can just add another 100 grams of bread flour. You'll be fine. It's going to be okay. 100 grams. Sweet! And then I'm going to mix it all up. I use a gloved hand because I'm actually mildly allergic to wheat and rye. Really convenient, really fun. I'm gonna go kind of in a circular motion to try to hydrate as much of the flour in that pool of water as possible. See, you just get stuff everywhere. So you have your hand. The dough will come off your bare hands best with warm water, and you can just kind of like get that off. It'll be a thing. But then you have your dough, woo, and it's gonna hang out for about 30 minutes in what bakers call an autolyse period. Make sure you cover your dough for that time frame. You can use plastic wrap. I have these handy dandy little reusable silicone tops. The autolyse period is essentially an opportunity for your dry ingredients, your flours, to absorb all the water that you added. This results in better extensibility of your dough and of your gluten strands, and it also gives the yeast an opportunity to ferment before you add the salt.
Segue to the salt. Salt is very important. You're gonna need salt because salt.
So, segue to the salt. So you're gonna add your salt and a little bit of more water after your autolyse period of 30 minutes. And salt is really important for dough because it controls fermentation. Without salt, your dough is going to ferment unpredictably, it's not going to behave, and it's not going to taste very good. So here I have 13 grams of salt, and then I'm going to add 50 grams of water to this. Okay, so it's been 30 minutes. Your autolyse has been hanging out. So now it's time. Your salt and your water should be decently combined. It's okay if there's still a little bit of just granular situation going on. That's fine. Most of it should dissolve if you're using lukewarm water. So you add this. You add this to your autolyse dough, and you kind of mix it up in the same way that you mixed this the first time. Now that you have your combined dough, right, it's gonna look really squelchy and really shaggy and kind of gross. It's fine. I'm gonna do 4 folds every 45 minutes, and I'll show you all those folds along the way. All right, now that you're back after your first 45 minutes, we're gonna give this bad boy a fold. You always want to work with dough with wet hands. Okay, wet hands, right? So I'll try to back this up so everybody can see. You have dough, flip, and then rotate it and flip. And flip. And flip. It's been another 45 minutes. We're gonna do our second fold with your wet hands. Do all 4 corners. And then lift your dough mass up and make it a nice, beautiful ball again. Put it in, and then another 45 minutes. Woo! Okay, now it's time for the third fold. Yeah. So you can see this guy has gotten like a nice little bigger, a little bit jiggly. Just like have your wet hands, right, and you stick your fingers in it and you squish the dough. You can almost feel little tiny bubbles between your fingers, right? So we're still gonna do those 4 corners again. Make this a nice, neat little ball. We're gonna let it sit for another 45 minutes. Okay, we're back for the 4th fold. So when you look at your dough now, it should be a little bit more jiggly, a little more puffy. We're gonna do our final little stretch and fold series. All 4 corners again, round. And then if you squish it, you can feel those little bubbles popping, those tiny little bubbles. And you'll also be able to see some surface bubbles. And if you remember that original texture from, now we have a dough that's a lot like, I mean, it's not a perfect gluten window, but it's pretty good. We're gonna take it, you know? After this 4th fold, we're gonna portion and roll these guys into bowls. It's gonna be a good time. Yeah. Okay, so you want to take a look at this guy and you'll see that it's risen quite a bit. It is really floofy, has a lot of air in it. You can see a lot of fermentation bubbles on the surface, which is exactly what we're looking for. Especially if you squish it, you're really gonna feel those little tiny air pockets and those little air bubbles in the dough. But to portion mine, like I have 2 loaves in this batch. I'm just gonna eyeball it. And you're gonna want to have a nice clean surface to work on because we're gonna go exactly on here. You're gonna wanna have some water handy for the shaping process. So you have your dough, you're gonna slap it on. We're gonna make a boule, which is referring to a round shape. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna take your dough scraper, you're going to push the dough forward and back, forward and back. You can readjust, forward and back. Or you don't have one of these guys. You're just gonna keep your hands wet. And then you can also shape your ball just with your hands by doing that same dragging motion with your hands. You just want to watch your surface because if it gets too wet, you're not going to be able to create that drag and resistance in your dough ball. But really you just want to loosely get it into a round shape where it has a nice smooth surface on the top. You're going to set this to the side. And tension is really important because if you have a lot of tension, you're able to score and essentially your loaf is going to have a better shape. It's not going to fall out into a round ball. It's going to stay in a nice little loaf rectangle type situation. We're back after our 30 to 40 minute rest period. This was 30 minutes, but if you see these guys, they're a little more relaxed, they're a little more flat. They kind of like lost that tension that we built into it. But don't worry, we're gonna build more tension. It's like a high school dance out here. So you're gonna sprinkle the tops with flour. You're gonna kind of like spread that around, nice. Oh yes, my friends. And then you have your bread basket. So you can also use a tea towel in a bowl and you kind of like have your towel and you lay it in there so it's like nice and smooth, and you can flour that tea towel so that way it doesn't stick. But I use this size of a strainer. tiny strainer, and you're gonna kind of dust the outside of your bread baskets. So I make sure to get the edges really well, just so they don't stick, because this is going to be going overnight, so that dough is going to absorb a bit of this flour. You want to make sure it does not stick. I just want to make sure my bottom is covered. Okay, so now we have our dough. We have this surface, and I'll kind of scrape all the flour out of the way, because if there's too much flour on this guy, then it's not going to be able to form that seam at the end of this. So you're going to take your little dough pancake, you're going to scoop it up on both sides and flip it over. So you're going to want to pull out the top and the bottom edges and try to make this round little pancake into a square, and try to keep your dough as even as possible. So you have your nice little square, right? You're going to take the top, pull it into the middle, the sides, pull it in to the middle. Then this bottom edge, you're going to pull slightly over that cross seam that you created, and then you're going to take your bottom two edges into the middle, into the middle. You're going to take your bottom edge, you're going to pick it up, kind of support and cradle this whole guy. So you take your bottom edge, pick them up, and you're going to roll a burrito. I'll pull this guy back. So you have this like nice little loaf shape. You're going to take the top edge, try to pull it to the bottom. And that's going to create a seam on the bottom and a seal. So you're going to take a little bit more flour, dust the top to have an extra layer of flour protecting your loaf from sticking to your nice little guy. You're going to flip it into your basket. You can leave these out for 30 more minutes to rise a little bit more if you want a larger crumb or more aeration, more bubbles and stuff like that. You're definitely going to get a lot more oven spring if you do that. These guys feel really nice and aerated and jiggly today. What I'm looking for is kind of like a nice jiggle, and then put them in the fridge overnight. Don't wrap them, because they're going to create this beautiful skim crust on the outside that's going to help with the crispiness of your crust. Your dough baby had a really nice rest overnight, has a nice firm top and has a nice skin going on. That's going to be able to help us create that crunchy crust that everybody loves. You're going to have your oven preheated to 500 degrees with your cast iron, your Dutch oven, or your baking stone in it. And you're going to want to take the temperature of your baking vessel to make sure that it is also at 500 degrees. So you're going to pull out your baking vessel. Make sure you're using a dry towel or something that's really good for heat, because this guy's really hot. You're going to take your bread basket. If you feel like your flour is a little, I don't know, you're scared about it, you can check your edges to make sure they lift off. And then you're going to do this nice little flip action. You're going to take it, you're going to flip, and you might need to guide or pull your loaf out of your bread basket. You're going to want to make sure it lands right in the middle, so that way it's not touching any of the sides. You take your lom or your sharp knife or your razor blade or your scissors, and you're going to create openings on the top of the dough. That way your molten dough on the inside is able to expand and grow in the oven. Just don't be afraid, just slice it. It's just slice it. And you're going to want to go on one side more than the other, so that way it opens up beautifully. I'll try to angle this guy so it's a little easier to see. No, I'm not. That's a pro move. I'm not ready for that yet. Slice. With authority. Don't let the bread know that you're afraid. As soon as it knows you're afraid, the jig is up. I'll give a little more length to those outer corners if I think they need it. Then I'll come back for my lid. So take this hot lid, put it over the top, make sure you're not pinching any of your dough. I'll bring my handles together and then put this guy in there. And then you're gonna set a timer for 20 minutes and you want that lid to be on. The lid is gonna hold in the steam that's produced from that dough at that hot temperature. And steam is really crucial for sourdough baking because it keeps the outside of that dough, of that loaf, nice and soft, so that way it's able to expand and grow in the oven. If it was uncovered, then it would just form a crust immediately and just not be aesthetically pleasing and not rise or get that oven spring, which is referring to the growth between the loaf size to the final bread size in the oven. And yeah, if you don't have a cast iron like that one, you can also use a Dutch oven with a lid or like a baking stone. And what you can do is flip this guy onto a piece of parchment paper, and then you can score it on that piece of parchment paper and then pick it up and lower that into your baking vessel or slide that onto your baking stone in the oven. And for your baking stone, you can take a metal bowl that's just, make sure it's like way bigger than the loaf that you have going on in there. Take your metal bowl and you flip it on top of your baking stone. And you'll have that bowl acting as a lid and keeping some of that steam in. That way you're able to get that nice oven spring that everyone's chasing. Okay, so now you can drop your oven to 450 degrees. Keep that lid on because you want to keep that steam in there, but drop the oven to 450 and then add another 10 minutes. So your 10-minute timer went off. Now it's the time to take that lid off of that super hot loaf and make sure you have a place for that lid to land. So I kind of like lift up one of the sides, bring it back, and then this will go here. Our loaf doesn't have much color at this point, but it will get better because we're gonna let it toast up uncovered at another 450 degrees for another 10 minutes. Your first round of 10 minutes with the lid off has passed, so then you're gonna do a rotate in your oven. You're gonna see a little bit more color on this loaf, and then do another 10 minutes at 450. Yeah, your final timer just went off. That last 10 minutes at 450 degrees. Do I want more char on this? Do I need this to be darker? Me personally, this is fine. You can let this hang out and cool down a little bit. 10 minutes on this is fine, but you do want to transfer it to a wire rack. I'm just going to touch it. Why not flex? Ta-da! You want to transfer it to a wire rack so that way this crust on the bottom doesn't sog out. And for a fun time, you can listen to the bread crackle as it cools. And that's pretty much it. It's bread. It exists. It's my friend. Making a lot of bread. It's cool. You can too. But yeah, I really hope I don't disappoint any of the people who have been teaching me to make sourdough along the way. I just, hey guys, what's up? Just making sourdough, just like how you taught me. We'll see how it goes. Might be good, might be bad. I've been doing it for about a year now professionally, and I only got scoring the top so it opens up real nice and pretty right about 4 days ago. So obviously I'm at a point now to be teaching people. We'll see.